I want to welcome the Rumi Forum, who does incredible work as well, has invited the temple to many programs over the years, and does incredible work of development understanding as well. I want to just ask both for a welcome from Dan Spiro on behalf of Jewish-Islamic Dialogue Society, and then also from Emery Chelik from the Rumi Forum before we get started. So Dan, come just say hello.
Well, I want to thank Rabbi Jeff and this shul, which has obviously been a great benefactor to JIDS, for hosting us and for all the work that you do with the interfaith communities. I've attended some wonderful non-JIDS interfaith events here, and I will continue to do that. And to those of you who are members of this shul who don't like to travel, you're looking at a Washingtonian who went to Stanford, and I drove there. Every day. And I love to drive. I know it's environmentally not the right thing to say, but please come when we have events. Our next one is on Capitol Hill, February 25th. We're talking about this obscure guy named Ibrahim, you may have heard of him. We're beginning our 10th year with that meeting. And it will be provocative as always. It'll be about what unifies us and what divides us, based on Ibrahim. So please come to that. We've got information there about the next meeting. Please sign up to be on our email distribution list so you will receive information going forward about Jewish-Islamic dialogues in Washington. I want to make two brief announcements about other organizations. First of all, the Greater Washington Muslim Jewish Forum, a sister group, and the Adams Center and the McLean Islamic Center are inviting you all to a dialogue with two outstanding doctors, a Palestinian Muslim and an Israeli Jew, who are committed to providing access for Palestinians to quality health care while building bridges of understanding. And this presentation will be held this coming Thursday, January 25th, from 12 to 2 at the Adams Center, which is in Sterling, Virginia. One of these is a doctor, a Palestinian from Jerusalem, and a Jew from Beersheba. And they're going to be discussing the work of a project that is committed to helping gravely ill Palestinian children and adults and give them life-saving care in Israeli hospitals. If you're interested, Walter Ruby is somewhere, there he is. Please see Walter or me at the end of this program. Also, you may have heard of New Story Leadership, which has been around for several years, and they bring 10 to 12 Palestinians and Israelis here to intern in the district. Well, when they're here, they're housed somewhere, and they're looking for families who will host one or two of these outstanding leaders of tomorrow. So please see Ira Weiss about that at the end of the program if you might be interested in being a host for these outstanding young leaders. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings. I might add, I came from about 11 minutes away, so I suspect I'll be getting an award next year. Good afternoon, everyone. I have the pleasure of, the privilege, and maybe even the pressure of presiding over the Rumi Forum. I've been based here in the Northern Virginia area for the last 10 years, and as part of my position in DC as well at the Rumi Forum. The forum was founded in 1999 by American Muslims, and I might add we've been doing this since pre-9/11. I think that's significant, dedicated purely to the cause of interfaith and intercultural understanding. So we're coming up on 2 decades of doing this good work with good friends and really potential friends, because that's how I usually describe the two types of people in the world. That people sitting across from you are either friends or potential friends. So we hope to play a part in inculcating these ideas, being a catalyst for positive change not only outside but really inwardly as well. I think that's a very important part of the dialogue process. It should not ever be a monologue. It needs to be about learning from the other and about ourselves as we walk the path of Abraham and others. And I thank you, each and every one of you, sincerely for being here today. Please visit our website. We've got a ton of things happening elsewhere in the wider Washington DC metro area, and of course I want to thank the Rabbi and our host today. So blessings to you all in 2018, and I look forward to more circumstances in which we can come together and bring others that don't usually partake in such activism. Again, have a lovely day. Thank you.
I'll lower this back down again. So I want to thank Dan and Emre for choosing a really provocative and great question for today's session. The question being, what's the question again? The challenge of survival. Something like the challenge of survival, maintaining a minority faith in a melting pot nation. Is that fair enough? It's a question that I'm sure that all three of the traditions that are going to be represented today in this discussion, maybe more as we continue to talk, think about a lot. I mean, I was just having a significant conversation about this issue just yesterday, and maybe this topic will come up that I was speaking about later on. I think we're wrestling with this all the time. It's a question that not only does it stick with every minority community, but it also changes. It's always changing. And I think actually, particularly in the Jewish community, it's in a period, we are really in a period of change in how we need to think about our own relationship to this question. So let's get into it. We have three panelists. Our third, I believe, she's just arrived.
Yeah.
So that's great. I'm going to introduce each of them, and they're going to speak for a little while, and then we'll have a chance to ask them some questions, and then we'll break up a little bit later into small groups so that we can talk about it ourselves. So I'm going to begin with Dr. Ira Weiss. He was raised in an Orthodox Jewish family on the Lower East Side of New York, where he attended yeshiva. He then went on to get his PhD in physiological psychology and to practice neurophysiology for over 3 years. More recently, he's been active in organizations and programs that address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Ira helped found an NGO that brought Palestinian and Israeli high school students to Spain for summer coexistence workshops. And he has developed an adult education course called History of the Arab-Jewish Conflict, Parallel Narratives Never Meet, which has taught in many venues in the DC area. He's involved in a number of interfaith organizations, and he's been a major contributor to JIDS over the years, serving, among other things, as its beloved videographer. I want to ask Dr. Weiss to begin.
So I'm not an expert in this area. I'm a neurophysiologist of 30 years, not 3. And so what I'm going to say is give you an idea of how I personally see the problem of the challenge of survival of a religious minority from the perspective of Jewish history. That is to say, I look at Jewish history and I'm using that the elements in Jewish history to try to understand what are the challenges and what are the chances of overcoming those challenges. Now, the Jewish people have survived, near as I can tell, historically for about 4,000 years so far, and most of that time as a minority. So I think one might think that they know the secret to survival as a religious minority, but what I'm going to talk about is why I think that may not be true. I think their survival for so long may be something of a fluke. The evidence, as I see it from history, suggests that the Jewish community may be able to continue to survive as a minority for another century or two, but probably not much longer than that. And to begin to understand why I think that, we need to go back and review who the Jews are and how they've survived for this long. Now, Even who the Jews are is not a straightforward question. It's also controversial, but the word Jew is a derivative of the word Judean. The Judeans were the descendants of the indigenous national group that was expelled from Judea by the Romans around the year 135. But those people who were expelled had already been in existence for about 2,000 years by that time, at the time the Romans expelled them. They were called alternatively Hebrews and Israelites. Those are the main names that were used to refer to them, and they're still referred to as Hebrews or Israelites, depending on what language you speak. But in most of the English-speaking world, they're known as Jews. This originally Hebrew-speaking group of people seems to have evolved its separate national identity somewhere around 4,000 years ago, either in the Fertile Crescent, in what's today Iraq, or in Canaan. And they seem to have maintained that group identity ever since. Outside of accounts in the Torah and the Jewish Bible, whose orally transmitted origins are of uncertain age, the oldest actual mention of the Israelites that we know about today is an inscription on an Egyptian stele that dates to 1209 BCE. So that's over 3,000 years ago that we find written evidence of the existence of these Israelites. Now, the Hebrews are described in the Torah as a goy, a nation. That's the Hebrew word that means nation, not religion. In fact, near as I can tell, the word religion does not occur anywhere in the Torah. There is a modern Hebrew word, dot, for religion, but I don't think it occurs anywhere in the Torah. So it's probably most accurate to think of the Jews as a nationality first and an adherents of a religion second. 4,000 years ago, the Jews offered sacrifices to the same pantheon of gods to which other nations in the Mediterranean region also offered sacrifices. In the case of the Jews, it seems the most important, at least two of the most important of these gods in the pantheon were El and Yahweh. Between the 6th and 7th century BCE, the Jewish people's cultural, spiritual beliefs evolved into monotheism, and El and Yahweh became two of the names of the one God. I would call that the start of what we today call the Jewish religion. Although that religion did undergo significant changes, especially after the last temple was destroyed in Jerusalem in the year 70 of the Common Era. Now, for about 2,000 continuous years since then, until the establishment of the modern state of Israel in the 20th century, Jews existed only as minorities in lands where others were the majority. And they maintained their separate identity and religion all that time. So it would seem reasonable to think that Jews know some secret of survival as a minority. But I think their survival for so long, as I said, I think it was something of a fluke, and I think it was due to some unique factors, or at least relatively unique factors. The first of those factors was rejection, active rejection by the majority. With very few exceptions, over that whole 2-millennial period since their expulsion from Judea, the minority status of Jews was accompanied by rejection and oppression by the majority societies in which they lived. And during most of that time, and in most of the countries where Jews lived, their rejection and marginalization from society at large is quite extreme. During that time, there were at least 70 instances in which the Jewish population was either massacred or expelled from a country in which they had been living. And when they were not killed or expelled, they were often allowed to live only in certain neighborhoods, forbidden to marry non-Jews, forbidden to own land, and forbidden to engage in most occupations. Given those facts of life, it's hardly surprising that Jews found themselves marrying other Jews, working the same jobs as other Jews, socializing primarily with other Jews, and so on. The isolation was so pervasive in so many places that Jewish dialects developed into distinct local Jewish languages. At the turn of the 20th century, there were over 20 different, specifically Jewish languages in the world, ranging from Yiddish Deutsch, known to some of you as Yiddish, to Judeo-Espanol, known to some of you as Ladino, to several dialects of Judeo-Arabic, and this Judeo-Kurdish. There are many other Jewish languages, 22 Jewish languages. That sort of isolation, the kind of isolation that allows a group to evolve its own language, that kind of isolation by the majority population is pretty much guaranteed to prevent the assimilation of Jews into the majority culture and thus preserve their separate culture, including their separate religion. And for 2,000 years, that seems to be what's happened. So, do we have any evidence of what happens when the rejection and marginalization that characterized Jewish life in most places for those 2 millennia is eased? I think the answer is yes. The 20th century was witness to 2 models of what happens under different circumstances. The first is what happens when societies emerge in which Jews are far more accepted and acceptable than they had been pretty much everywhere else for centuries. The second model is what happens when Jews are no longer a minority. That situation emerged for the first time in 2 millennia when the State of Israel was established in May of 1948. So let's first look at what happens when a newly tolerant society, or a more tolerant society, erupts. In this case, emerged in Europe. In the wake of World War I, the Weimar Republic came into being in Germany. It was by all measures a secular, progressive, liberal democracy. Among the many societal changes that took place during the Weimar Republic, Jews found themselves enjoying a far greater degree of acceptance than ever before in Europe. Jews were able to move from Jewish ghettos to non-Jewish neighborhoods, began to socialize much more with non-Jewish Germans. As a consequence, as many as 50% of the Jews of Germany lost all connections to the Jewish community. Many of those who still retained some identification with the Jewish community chose to change features of Jewish religion to more closely mimic the practices of the majority Christian religions that surrounded them. So, although technically forbidden, what had been accepted Jewish religious doctrine for at least 10 centuries, they changed the language of worship from Hebrew to German. They changed the Sabbath worship from Saturday to Sunday. They sat women and men together during worship. They incorporated forbidden musical instruments into the Sabbath service, and so on. They abandoned the wearing of talitot, prayer shawls, and the wearing of kippot. And a significant number of German Jews began to convert to Christianity, outright conversions. In many German circles, it became acceptable for Germans to marry Jews. And within a short time, in some of the largest cities in Germany, 40% of Jews were marrying non-Jews. Only a tiny minority of the children of these mixed marriages retained their Jewish identity as adults. So the Weimar period of Jewish acceptance by the German majority turned out to be very short-lived, as we know. In 1933, Hitler was elected, and Jews quickly became the subjects of a campaign of isolation, followed by expulsion, followed by extermination. But in looking back at the Jewish experience during the Weimar period, some Jewish historians said that Hitler did not have to initiate a Holocaust to make Germany free of Jews. If he had just allowed the accepting social mores of the Weimar Republic to continue for another generation or two, the Jewish population of Germany would have disappeared on its own through assimilation. Now, another example of a country where Jews encountered increased tolerance was, of course, the United States. For nearly 20 centuries, Jews were scattered among 50 countries, 60 countries around the world, and spoke more than 20 different, specifically Jewish languages and dozens of other non-Jewish languages. However, in the 20th century, the Holocaust and the Arab-Jewish conflict combined to exterminate or displace the bulk of the Jewish populations from most of those countries, leaving the overwhelming majority of the world's Jews living in only 2 countries, the United States and Israel. In the United States, the Jewish population encountered conditions similar to those of the Weimar Republic. Far more acceptance, both legally and socially, far less isolation and rejection than they had historically experienced in the places from which they came. The effect on the Jewish population seemed to be similar to what we noted in the Weimar Republic. Jews, in attempting to adjust to the majority culture, which they suddenly found themselves part of, began to alter the principles of the Jewish religion that had been considered inviolate for at least 10 centuries. New, specifically American, non-traditional sects of Judaism emerged that institutionalized these changes. Jews tend to call these movements rather than sects. They're religious movements rather than religious sects, but they are indeed religious sects. And as of today, as we know, in America, they include the conservative, the American Reform movement, the Reconstructionist movement, the Renewal movement, the Chabura movement, and there are several others. And, like in the Weimar Republic, intermarriage also seems to be growing in response to this relaxed atmosphere. Americans not only accept Jews, Americans seem to like Jews. 5% of the members of the Jewish dating app JDate are actually non-Jews specifically seeking a Jewish mate. So it probably should not come as a shock that in America today, more Jews intermarry than do members of any other faith in America. Intermarriage in nearly every one of the countries to which American Jews emigrated had been less than 1%. In the United States, it is now 50%, 50. And with regard to Jewish survival, there's a strong statistical interaction among the increasingly non-Orthodox movements and the intermarriage rate and the fertility rate and the issue of Jewish identity. So while 2% of Orthodox Jews have non-Jewish partners, that number is 27% for conservative Jews, 50% for Reform Jews, and 67% for Jews who specify no denomination. And while the average Orthodox couple has 4.1 children, all the other categories of Jewish couples have less than 2 children, on the average, each couple. In other words, except among the Orthodox, the Jewish population is decreasing due to fertility alone. That effect is compounded by the loss of Jewish identity among the progeny of the intermarried couples. Only about 25% of the adult children of intermarried couples identify as Jewish, and only 1 in 8 grandchildren of intermarried couples identifies as a Jew. So it should not come as a surprise that the number of Jews in the United States is declining rather rapidly, except for the relatively small Orthodox community, at least still relatively small. So it seems to me that, at least in the case of the Jewish experience, isolation, oppression, and rejection facilitated survival of both the Jewish nation and its religion for some 20 centuries of existing as minorities. In situations where their minority status was accompanied by social and legal acceptance, the pressures of assimilation led to the sorts of changes in median religious and marriage customs that make Jewish identity perhaps unsustainable in the long term. Now, what about the Jews who found themselves suddenly in a majority? The state of Israel provides us the first chance to observe that situation in the last 2,000 years. With respect to the perpetuation of a population that self-identifies as Jewish, the effect is the opposite of what we see in the United States. The number of people who identify as Jewish in the US has been decreasing year after year, decade after decade now, while in Israel the number is increasing every year. With the population that's majority Jewish, the number of intermarriages would be expected to be lower just by chance because there's so many Jews to meet. And also, since the sorts of assimilation pressures that led in the United States to the establishment of so many non-Orthodox sects, those pressures are absent in Israel, and those sects are, for all intents and purposes, non-existent in Israel. There are half a dozen Reform synagogues, conservative synagogues, often populated primarily by expats. I won't get into all the details, compared to 10,000 Orthodox synagogues. So we're talking about really the conservative reform and reconstructionist renewal movements really don't exist in Israel. So the effect of existing as a majority seems to be conducive to the perpetuation of Jewish identity. With respect to Judaism, the Jewish religion, the effect of majority status is complex. In Israel, about 46% of Israelis who were born ethnically Jewish consider themselves secular or Chiloni. And that percentage is decreasing over time at the moment. 32% of Israeli Jews identify themselves as traditional, Masorti, and 22% as either Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, Dati or Haredi. Like adherents of the liberal American Jewish sects, most Israelis who identify as secular actually do keep some religious traditions, although the secular Israelis do so for cultural rather than religious reasons. Almost all Jewish Israelis are immersed in a secular culture that in Israel is also distinctly Jewish. So it seems to me that the prognosis for survival for Jewish identity in a melting pot like the United States is poor, with the exception of the Orthodox community, which is the only part of the American Jewish community that shows evidence of growth from generation to generation. I said melting pot rather than secular melting pot because United States society is not really a secular society. By Western standards, it's actually a strikingly religious society. Now in Israel, where Jews find themselves in the majority, those segments of the Jewish population that identify as Orthodox, traditional and secular, all seem to be increasing in absolute numbers, generation after generation, although the relative increase is also greatest among the Orthodox.
I'm sure there are a lot of burning questions already that we'd like to ask, but we want to bring in all of the speakers so that we can have a full discussion, so we'll resist that at the moment. I want to welcome Nisa Muhammad, who is the Assistant Dean for Religious Life at Howard University. She's responsible for religious programming that serves the various needs of the campus, advocates for the religious needs of Muslim students, faculty, and staff on campus, teaches non-academic personal enrichment classes on Islamic tradition, and works closely to foster interreligious dialogue and cooperation. Her other responsibilities include organizing Muslim worship and addressing a myriad of challenges from race to religion to relationships. In addition, Nisa is the advisor to the Muslim Students Association. She works closely with young Muslims by helping them strengthen and affirm their faith in the midst of challenging circumstances like being Black and Muslim, deciding between dropping out to be a better husband or finishing a degree, and how to become more religious in a world of unrighteous temptations.
Thank you. It's okay if I sit here?
Yes, certainly, whatever you're comfortable with.
This mic is working?
Try it out.
You can hear me okay?
It is working, but if you can move it a little closer,
I can.
that's great.
I can move it closer. Okay. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. For those of you here, Shalom. Peace. What's up? How you doing? I am Nisa Muhammad, and I am going to be talking about the challenges of being Black and Muslim. Because even though I am Muslim, and we're talking about melting pots and secularity and all that, I am a minority within a minority. And so at Howard University, which is a historically Black college and university, that's my focus, being Black and Muslim, and the challenges that we face. So I'm going to tell you a little story about one of the students that I work with. So Halima was excited to go to State University. Her parents went to another university and told her wonderful stories about being in the Muslim Students Association where they met their best friends. They told her about the exciting events and programs they attended as young Muslims trying to make their way in the world, the halaqas, which are like study groups, the amazing guest speakers, and the trips to other schools to socialize, as well as the networks they built with other young Muslims. Halima wanted the same things. She was eager to get started, and with freshman fervor, she went to the first Muslim Association meeting of the semester. She was surprised to be the only Black person there. She was even more surprised when she received the looks as she walked in the room. Halima chalked it up to being new and figured more Black people would come later in the semester. That didn't happen. However, Halima was undaunted. She came to every meeting, but by mid-semester realized her ideas and suggestions were always turned down. Maybe it was just because she was a freshman, she thought. Maybe she was being hazed. She kept coming and kept trying until at one meeting, she suggested that at the next event, they have something other than Desi, South Asian, or Middle Eastern food. Have a more diverse menu. One of the students responded with a snarl, "Do you want us to have bean pies?" Well, she thought, that's not a bad idea. But the message was clear. This was her last meeting at the MSA. She took her hurt, rejected feelings and started going to the Black Student Union meetings. There, she was welcomed because of her race, but there was no activity in regards to her religion. In fact, she felt as if they tolerated her breaks for prayers, cheese pizza only please, and her hijabi modest attire. Halima was at the intersection of race and religion, as many Black Muslim university students are at predominantly white institutions find themselves. Not at Howard University, where we celebrate everything Black and we celebrate being Muslim, but what happens is that students at other schools surrounding Howard University, Georgetown, GW, American, Trinity Catholic University, migrate to Howard University because they are conflicted with the racism they experience on their campuses, and they look for a safe space. So on their MSA campuses, when they want to protest police brutality, they want to protest other events, they want to get involved in Black Lives Matter, and they're told, that's not Islamic, that's not an issue we deal with. we only deal with Palestine, we deal with Syria, and they're like, well, wait a minute, we want to deal with these issues also. We think these are Muslim issues also, and they're told no. How can they get involved? So they're like, we're going to go someplace where we know we can deal with these issues. They're at the intersection of race and religion. And so how do they figure these things out as young people? We know college-age students, they're all in the process of changing their minds. They're all in the process of trying to figure out their way. How do they fit into this world? How do they fit into the world where they are, and how do they make their way? And we know that as young people, the ideas that they have as young people are the ideas that they then take into the world. And so these same ideas of race and religion, we find them in the mosque. And so in many mosques in the area, black people are still trying to find their way. Black people are still trying to find a place for themselves in the world. And so when we look at melting pot, we think of people coming from someplace else trying to bring their culture to a melting pot of America, but black people have been here all along. In fact, Islam is the first religion that black people chose for themselves. Christianity was forced upon black people. Black people brought here as slaves. Christianity was forced upon them. Islam is the first religion black people were able to choose for themselves. It was not forced on them. They were not made to worship Jesus, but they were able to choose Islam for themselves when they were able to convert to Islam. And so when black people think of melting pot, they don't think of themselves. They don't think that the melting pot story includes them. It's not something that speaks to who they are in the world of melting pot. They may think, well, let's talk about a salad bowl. Let's talk about, because we're all in this together. Let's talk about a salad bowl. Because in a salad bowl, we're all bringing something significant and we're all bringing something valuable to the dinner. The tomatoes are wonderful and valuable in and of themselves. The lettuce is great and wonderful in and of itself. The cucumbers rock. The carrots, you can eat a carrot by itself, it has value. When you put them all together, you have a wonderful salad, and you can add some dressing, and you have a wonderful salad. But in a melting pot, who's controlling that fire? How hot does it have to get for everything to melt? What has to happen for everything to now has to melt and it to all be a melting pot and we all have to now mix? Because black people have been here for over 400 years and we haven't mixed in all together. And especially now black Muslims who are here and still trying to struggle and still trying to find our way. And things are so bad for some black Muslim students on college campuses around the country where the University of Pennsylvania, they had to start their own separate Black Muslim Students Association. Because at the regular MSA, they couldn't find their way. There was no opening, no welcoming, no way for them to get involved and be a part of what was going on. It's a very sad state of affairs. They had to start their own separate organization in order to feel empowered and as a part of what was going on that campus. And so there are a lot of challenges in being a minority within a minority, but this is nothing new. Malcolm X faced this same issue. So that when Malcolm X left the Nation of Islam, he was asked by Sayyid Ramadan, the father of Tariq Ramadan, when he was asked, wait a minute, you left the Nation of Islam, but you're still sounding like a nationalist. You're still sounding like, you're still talking about you want to be for these black people. What's going on? And so in 1965, he was rebuked by Sayyid Ramadan, who said, how come a man of your spirit, intellect, and worldwide outlook, you fail to see in Islam its main characteristics from its earliest days as a message that confirms beyond doubt the ethnological oneness and quality of all races, thus striking the very root of monstrosity of racial discrimination. And he was concerned in a letter that he was inviting Malcolm X to speak at his center. But Malcolm X responded. He said, I'm an African American. My responsibility is to my 22 million fellow black Americans who still suffer the same indignities because of their color as I do. I cannot just say I am a Muslim and ignore the racism my people still experience just because I am a Muslim. He says, I do not believe that the personal problems of racism can be solved just because I say I'm a Muslim and I can ignore that. It does not happen. And so because we are Muslims, we have a responsibility. So that black people say, let's go give dawah to the people. Oh no, we don't want to go do that. There are enough Muslims now. Let's not do that. But wait a minute, we want all our people to be Muslims. Let's go to Southeast and give dawah to the people. No, we don't want to do that. We want to do something different. And so, as Muslims, within a minority, there are the challenges of being black and Muslim. And so I work with students at Howard University who are so wonderful to deal with these kinds of challenges on a daily basis. Not so much at Howard, but they work with their friends who around the country are dealing with these challenges on predominantly white institutions, who are made to feel less than a Muslim because they are black. What is beautiful in Islam? If you look at the images of what are beautiful, you rarely see dark-skinned women. If you look at the fashion shows or the beautiful models or what is beautiful in Islam, you rarely see dark-skinned women. And so our young people are looking at all young girls. They want to be beautiful. They want to see the fashions, the styles, the color, all of that. And they're looking for themselves in the magazines, where am I? And they don't see themselves. And so we struggle to help them feel beautiful. So we're having an event at Howard University called H.U. Hijab Fest, and we're bringing all the beautiful and wonderful black women there, so our students can see themselves in very wonderful and beautiful ways, to let them know that black is beautiful, and black is beautiful even if you're Muslim. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you so much, Nisa.
Thank you.
We're going to welcome now Gagan Naram, who is a learning and development professional and a Sikh scholar. She's represented Sikhism at various interfaith platforms. These include the Interfaith Conference of Metropolitan Washington, Interfaith Youth for Climate Justice, Montgomery County Interfaith Community, and the National Interfaith Anti-Bullying Council. Gagan is a founding member of the GGSF School for Sikh Studies in Rockville. She played a major role in developing a curriculum of Sikh studies for different age groups. The curriculum consisted of Punjabi language, history of Sikhism, and a study of the Sikh scriptures. She's also active in planning and implementing the annual Sikh youth camp called Camp Gurmat in Maryland for more than 20 years. She's passionate about helping Sikh youth stay connected with their roots and faith and maintain their unique identity internally as well as externally. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for having me here. This is our very first time where Sikhs are being included in this dialogue, and I appreciate you welcoming us with open arms. You will notice that the flyers that were passed out were of a different gentleman. And yes, I decided to come up here and say, yeah, I forgot my turban at the Gurdwara. And it's a different gender, by the way. But I always think that, anything that happens in life is always for a reason. I was meant to be here today with these wonderful people and my son, Jaspreet, who was nice enough to be dragged along here with me. Thank you. I would like to start off with a story of a middle school boy a few days after 9/11. This boy was trying to just get home. He left his school, just like every day, on his way home, when he suddenly noticed a couple of boys following him. He increased his pace. He knew something was not right. Before you knew, he was running. And these two boys running after him were screaming, "Bin Laden, Bin Laden." This guy's in tears now and running with all his life. He sees his home and knows not to go home because they know where he lives, and goes to a neighbor's house instead. Luckily, the neighbor was home, who becomes actually a Marine officer later on. He's still a kid here. And Jaspreet was safe. And he stands here in front of you, a grown-up 26-year-old who has survived that. This was just one example. And Jaspreet is just one of many Sikh youth who went through this crisis. Every day they went to school, every day they went to the playground, every day they tried to just leave home. They were dealing with this. You can call it mistaken identity, you can call it whatever we want. Should not happen to anyone. Anyone. Whether you're a Sikh, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, does not matter. I was looking at the topic for today's symposium, and it's like, what are the challenges we are facing? Does it resonate with you? And I was like, what does not resonate with us? I'm a mother of 3 children, Jaspreet being the middle one, and let me just say that the fact that he's standing here in his identity, maintaining that identity, the external, and hopefully the internal, don't know too much about you sometimes. But having said that, it has been a challenge, and it's easy for me to relate to it. And for the last 30 years or so, my work has been with interfaith, with intrafaith, because I feel like if you're not strong in who you are, how are you going to represent and get to know other faiths? Many times that intrafaith gets ignored, and we are ready to jump onto the interfaith ship, and you get there and you go, wait, who am I? Do I truly know myself? And in these challenging times of secularism, in a culture where we are trying to become part of a bigger culture, the American culture, I still have to understand what that is, by the way. Because when I read Melting Pot, I was talking to Dan, and I'm like, you know what, the first thing that comes to my mind is, melting pot or mosaic? Because that's what we are really aiming for. And I loved your example of salad, Nisa, that was so beautiful. I'd love to be the carrot, just saying. But we all bring something so special to this, what we call a new culture. And I've always stayed away from the term melting pot because, as Nisa was saying, how hot does the heat have to be for us to get there and become just one? How boring would that be? And I wore this outfit on purpose, actually, just wanted to kind of bring in the colors here and just kind of representing what the mosaic looks like when it is truly represented in a culture. We talk about challenges, it's not just before 9/11 or after 9/11, it's been always there, no matter who you are. We like to think that, Sikhs are especially being targeted because of their external identity. No, if it's not your turban or your facial hair, it'll be something else. It's the color of your skin, the clothes that you wear, so it doesn't really matter. And I feel like it's a much bigger problem that we have to address. And I would like to think that when I work with the youth every Sunday morning, I'm getting them ready to embrace who they are, not just because of their faith, their religion, their culture, or where they come from, but who they are, truly who they are. Because when we talk about inclusion, the challenges we are facing to the whole concept of inclusion, we're not just limiting ourselves to the most obvious and visible signs that are out there. We call them race, gender, culture, etc., but it's much deeper. Am I accepted for who I am, just the way I am? Because guess what? I bring value, I bring color, I bring diversity. Talking a little bit about Sikhism, because I want to make sure that I also follow the examples of my wonderful previous colleagues here, Ira and Nisa. Sikhism is not very old. It's, I would say, about 500 plus years old. And it's interesting because it is the 5th largest religion of the world. Who knew? You don't even hear the name Sikhism anywhere. You hear everything else, but you don't hear Sikhism. But it is the 5th largest religion. But we are spread all over the world. The origin is in India, where we're just 2% of the total population. But when I share some numbers with you, which I want to be respectful of those 10 minutes I was given to, that were given by Dan to me, but it's amazing how many Sikhs were part of the military there and how much they fought to get freedom when British were ruling India. So anytime it's, some force is needed, some effort is needed, some economic force is needed, Sikhs are always in the forefront. And the whole reason this faith was actually evolved even, or it came about by Guru Nanak, our founder, was to protect others, to make sure that we are always fighting for the religious independence of anybody and everybody. No matter who you are, Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian, if your religion is being challenged or your freedom is being taken away, you call on a Sikh. It's to the part where I grew up in India, I've been here 30 years, but anytime you're in trouble and you see that turban from a distance, usually they're colorful, he just likes black. You know that you can go to that person and ask for help. That's what Sikhs are known for, if you're familiar with that. And that's what we are known for, and we want to continue to be known for that. But when we talk about, what is the impact of a majority religion on any minority religion, when I was in India, I know I grew up speaking Hindi rather than Punjabi, because Hindi is a national language and that of the majority religion called Hinduism. You come to USA, and my kids, of course, I make an effort to make sure they speak Punjabi, but it's just easier because that's what everybody speaks, so you speak English. And we have to make a special effort to teach them Punjabi, which we do every Sunday. They know the language, they know the history, and they know where they come from. So when they are 18, they can make a choice, because it's not easy to be like this, to have facial hair, to have a turban on your head, and go out in public. So we hope that we give them enough that they're connected with their roots, but have the wings to fly far, far away. Thank you.